Please stay on the line while your call is completed. Long-distance charges may apply.
Hello, my name is Eric Slee on Analytical. I want to start off by introducing myself a little bit and explain how this podcast came to be. I initially created this podcast because of an assignment in my communications technology class. We were supposed to create a podcast episode where we interview someone about a certain topic that we're passionate about. I knew right off the bat when approaching this assignment, I wanted to be ambitious. I'm a huge fan of podcasts, although I didn't always used to be. It wasn't until I discovered one podcast called Serial that really made me fall in love with them. Serial is a podcast from the creators of This American Life, hosted by Sarah Koenig. Serial tells one story, a true story, over the course of a season. Serial has won every major award for broadcasting, including Dew Point Columbia, Scripps Howard, Edward R. Murrow, and the first ever Peabody Award to a podcast. The case covered in the first season of Serial is the one of Adnan Syed, which is the focal point of today's episode. I want to talk about the journey through Serial's coming to be, and the journalistic experience for Sarah Koenig as she documented her progress in looking into this case, and then we'll get to hear from Sarah Koenig herself to learn more about the perspectives. For those who have never listened to Serial or have never heard the name Adnan Syed, in 1999, 18-year-old Heyman Lee was found dead in Leakin Park, Baltimore. Hayes' recently ex-boyfriend, Adnan Syed, was accused and then sentenced to life in jail for her murder. Despite this, Adnan always insisted that he was innocent. It wasn't until October of 2014 that a podcast called Serial was released by This American Life, which, as previously mentioned, hosted by Sarah Koenig, highlighted key details in the case which had been previously missed. Since then, Adnan's case has been reopened, and as of September 19th, 2022, he's been released from his life sentence after 23 years behind bars. I stumbled across Serial one morning in search of a good podcast to listen to. I've always been greatly interested in true crime, so when I asked around for a good true crime podcast suggestion, my brother immediately suggested Serial. I gave it a listen, and I was instantly intrigued. However, it wasn't entirely the case itself that had me hooked, but rather the circumstances of this podcast's coming to be. Sarah Koenig is an American journalist and podcaster from New York. She first learned about this case through an email sent to her by a woman named Rabia Chowdhury, who had read an article from when Sarah was a reporter for the Baltimore Sun. This defense attorney was the same person who worked for Adnan, and quoted from Sarah, not only botched, but ultimately threw the case for more money. I couldn't help but think about the what-ifs of this scenario. What if the email had simply been ignored? Where would Adnan be today? Would he still be in prison? Because Sarah couldn't have known what would come out of making a podcast documenting her journey through uncovering this case. She simply started looking into the case out of piquant interest. To help answer these questions, I had the fortune of speaking with Sarah Koenig herself, so here's that. How did you go about researching Adnan's case after it had been over a decade since it was closed?
So the main help that I had, someone came to me with that idea, like it wasn't I didn't know about the case until someone kind of contacted me and it was like, hey, what about this? Mm-hmm. So, and she had his attorney's case file, just a ton of material. And then, I had access to, I talked to his current lawyer, and who put me in touch with Adnan himself. And then Adnan started saying, well, here's this person and this person. Like, he just started giving me names of people. I was like, well, who are your friends and who might know? And so sometimes it was directly coming from Adnan, like, who should I call? And then each person you then call, you're like, who else should I talk to? That's just like kind of basic reporting, right? Where you just ask everyone you talk to, who else should I talk to? Who else should I talk to? And then we also put in a Freedom of Information request for the prosecution's case file. So we got a bunch of material out of that as well. And we also had tape recordings, video recordings of his trials, his first trial, which ended in a mistrial, and the second trial. So it was a ton of material. This is all to say. We had a ton of material. It's not, in a case that's really, really old where everyone has died, that's hard sometimes. But a case that's just, 10, 20 years old where most of the people are still around, that's actually a pretty easy thing to investigate because there's so much documentation. Yeah, it's easier because everything is, if a case is ongoing, it's very, very difficult to get access to the case file and to detectives' notes and things like that. But when a case is over, people are like, sure, I don't care, take a look. So it's easier.
Yeah, that makes sense. This podcast has had a huge impact on Adnan's case, leading to his resentencing and now his release. Do you think personally that Adnan would still be in prison today if it had not been for Serial's release?
Probably. I mean, as you know, I didn't discover anything that released him. But yes, I think, the fact that so many people then started looking into it and it became a big known case and it had all these other eyeballs on it. Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably safe to say.
You state in the first episode of Serial that you have never been a crime reporter or a private investigator. So what are your thoughts on true crime as a genre, and how do you feel it has evolved since the release of Serial?
So it's not that I had never been a crime reporter. At that time, I was not a crime reporter. I have reported, I have done crime and court reporting in my career before I did that story. So that's not quite accurate. When I was making it, it's not like I was at that point a crime reporter, right? And obviously I'm not a private investigator, I'm a reporter. So it was more of a rhetorical kind of like, I'm just like a person who's interested in this. And I wanted to find out what was going on. So, but in terms of true crime, like I didn't really, this is a little embarrassing to say, but I had heard the term true crime, but I never, ever, ever thought about it. And I certainly did not think that's what I was doing in any way. Yeah. Like it just never crossed my mind, and it never crossed the mind. Like we never talked about it as a team either. We were just like, we're just doing this story because we're interested in the story. It wasn't like we're going to make a true crime podcast because we think that's cool. It was just like, oh, here's a story. Here's an interesting person with an interesting, conflict, and what can we learn about it? And what can we learn about our system in the meantime? So that's what we were doing. In terms of like how it's, I don't know. True crime is a really old genre. It's always had people doing it who do it well and responsibly, and also people who do it irresponsibly and badly and very cheesy and sensationalist. And I think that's still true. I think it certainly seems to be a moneymaker. So there's like more of it around that we're noticing, but it's always been around.
Yeah. So you were kind of involved in the genre and you didn't even know that you were.
Yes, I think that is fair to say. I think it's also fair to say that's the only story like that I've done. Like, I've made other series since then, and I don't think any of them would qualify as a true crime story. Yeah. So it's not like I do true crime. Like I did a story that qualifies, I guess, as true crime, although I still wouldn't call it that. But it's not what I do. Yeah. You know what I mean? So it's not. Yeah.
So the next question I have is, how do you handle ethical dilemmas when reporting a story? For me, I think it was, make sure you identify them and identify them early on. And sometimes you're not even the person to identify them. Sometimes somebody else is the one saying like, wait, why are you doing this? Or have you thought about that? And just always making sure that you consider those. And, and sometimes you might disagree and be like, I don't see it that way, or that's, I've weighed the pros and cons and I come down, here's where I come down ethically. But I think that's where it's super important to always work with people who you trust and are smart and have sometimes opinions that are different from yours, who are challenging you to just make sure, like sort of everybody is checking. It's like with, I don't know if you've ever had like an ethical dilemma, right, where you've tried to weigh it. It's like,
you hope that you have people in your life who you can be like, I don't know what to do. Here, let me lay out this problem for you. What do you think? And it's the same thing in journalism, right? Like you just have people around you who you're like, and we talk about it all the time. It's currently like we just had a story meeting on Thursday for the Serial staff, and there were two, pretty big ethical issues with two stories that were being pitched. And we, as a big group of 8 people, 9 people, we all discussed like, how should we approach this? And people have different opinions, and might be like, well, I think you could do it this way, or I don't think you can do this story at all, or I think you could only do it under these circumstances. So it's an ongoing ethical issues are an ongoing conversation always. I think the danger is if you're like, I don't even need to think about it. Like that's a red flag to me. There's always something that you have to weigh.
Yeah.
So
does that ever
I think just working
like
with a team you trust.
overwhelming or stressful?
Yeah, I don't know about overwhelming. It felt a little overwhelming when Serial was coming out. I will say I got overwhelmed by it when Serial was like 2/3 of the way done, and just it was such a public kind of phenomenon at that point. And I had never, no story any of us had ever worked on had that kind of reaction or had that kind of public, I don't know, frenzy around it almost. Mm-hmm. And then, there's Reddit and all these like online chat, and people just behave so badly on those things sometimes. So irresponsibly, just the way that people were interacting with it and treating, the people in the stories as if they were fake and like didn't have feelings or didn't have life. That was overwhelming and very, very, very stressful to me that I had caused that response and had caused like harm possibly to people who were just like had talked to me in good faith for a story, because when I was reporting it, it's not like I was saying like, hello, Aisha, here's who I am. And this is going to be a massive hit with millions and millions of listeners. And people are going to start looking for your address and try to call you on the phone. Mm-hmm. Right. Like I was just saying, oh, hey, I work for This American Life. I'm a radio reporter. I'm working on a story. Can you talk to me? So it wasn't like we weren't able to warn people because we didn't know we didn't know anything. We didn't know it was going to turn into that.
Yeah. So there was now that sense of responsibility almost that you were getting.
Yes, right. That like we had like dragged these poor people into this like kind of cultural, like pop culture frenzy. So anyway, so that was overwhelming. Other than that, I think, every story has its stresses, and I've been doing it a long time, and you just kind of keep breathing and do the best you can. And, but no, I've never been like, felled by a story or something like that. Yeah.
So how do you see the future of journalism and the media industry evolving? And what role do you think that podcasts have in that evolution?
I don't know. These are like, sort of business media questions that I don't have any smarts about. I mean, I think
that's okay.
You're seeing what I'm seeing, which is just like now there are 10 million podcasts. And some of them are very good and the majority of them are terrible. And that's kind of where we are. I have a lot of fear about people funding journalism that's kind of entertaining over journalism that's actually kind of boots on the ground, beat reporting that I think is like absolutely, absolutely necessary for any kind of healthy society or healthy democracy. And so like sometimes like I like that there's so many more documentary projects that seem to exist now. Like there's definitely this huge appetite, right? Like you're seeing on series and on Netflix, and all these things are funded in this way, and some of them are beautifully made or thoughtfully done and good, and that's all great. But sometimes and I'm not saying I know this to be, I'm just saying, like, just as a citizen of the United States, like, I worry, like, but at the same time, like, 10 newspapers are closing every day, local newspapers, or whatever it is. Like, I don't know how many thousands of newspapers fold every year in this country. And so that's terrifying to me.
Yeah. So how do you ensure that your reporting is objective and not influenced by your personal beliefs or biases?
I do not think there's such a thing as objective reporting, right? Like, I'm sort of the school that believes we all have our biases. Like, we can't help it. We all do. And so if that's true, therefore there is no such thing as objectivity in that way. So it's everything from the stories we choose to do, the people we choose to talk to first, second, or third, the order in which you talk to people, the manner in which you talk. It's all just baked into who we are. So I don't think you can avoid that. What I think you can do, though, is it's sort of like when you're asking about the ethical questions, you just have to be aware of it. You have to recognize that you have the bias, and then make sure you are installing in your reporting and throughout your project checks and balances against that bias to check yourself all the time. And again, that is where your colleagues come in to say, you really seem to be giving this person a lot of airtime and not so much to this. Have you, why? Why are you using this person less than that? Why are you not believing this argument, but you are believing that argument? Where is that coming from? And sometimes it's fair. You're just like, I've done all my homework. I've checked. This person's full of shit. This person's telling the truth. Therefore, like, I'm going to believe this person. And that's fine. But you just have to make sure you do the homework and don't just go on your gut in some way, because what your gut is full of bias, actually.
Yeah.
You have to be careful of your gut. So it's sort of a combination of just like making sure. So in other words, I don't go for objectivity. I don't think that is a goal that I should be going for. I do go, though, for fairness.
Okay. Yeah, that's cool. So, like, acknowledge the bias rather than pushing it away so that you can, like, deal with it.
Yeah, you can't take it away.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's like saying, like, so I'm an American female upper middle class Jewish woman. Like, I can't stop being that person, right?
Yeah.
Like, and that comes with a certain background, right? Like, all of my experiences have come through certain lenses and certain experiences in the way, right? That's just who we are. That's how my brain has developed. So I can't get rid of that. So but I have to know it's there. I have to know it's there and acknowledge that it's affecting how I do my work all the time.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
And I'm not saying acknowledge it in the work, be like, I'm a white lady, so I think this. Just be like, oh, okay, where's my comfort level? Where's my discomfort level? Why? Why am I comfortable over here but not comfortable over there? Why am I interested in this aspect of the story but not that aspect of it? What am I afraid of over here? What am I not looking at? Why am I not looking at? You know what I mean? You're just asking yourself all the time. And again, making sure your colleagues are pushing on you too. I mean, this is why it's good to have diversity of every kind in every news organization and every journalistic organization for that exact reason.
Yeah.
So we can all challenge each other,
So following up with biases, with all said and done, do you have an opinion on Adnan's guilt or innocence?
So, I guess sort of privately I do, but I don't, I guess what I would say is my opinion doesn't matter as a reporter in this way. I think
sense.
like what I can prove matters. So, and I think like no one sort of understands that better than Adnan himself. Of like, it doesn't matter what anyone thinks out in the world. It matters what we can show and what we can prove.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So, I don't think that I would talk about that. And I also feel like, what I was able to show and learn is included in the podcast. It's not like I left out some important, like it would have been, unethical, I think, and also just bad journalism, frankly, if I had left out some key pieces of information that actually swayed me or the audience one way or the other. Like, I didn't. What I know and what I know confidently, I put in the podcast. What I don't know confidently is because there isn't enough evidence to back it up, and therefore it is not in the podcast.
Yeah,
and
no,
so like
fair.
I wouldn't air that context, you know what I mean? Because that's not responsible.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And lastly, what do you consider to be the most important skills for a journalist?
I would say curiosity is very important, and a kind of an openness to people who are different from you, who think differently from you. Like to be able to actually hear what people are saying to you, to kind of cut through, frankly, your own bias, right? Like, this guy, I hate this guy's politics. I don't want to, he's an asshole and a racist, and I don't want to hear anything he has to say. Kind of forcing yourself to be like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
This person has a point of view. He has a point of view for a reason. Let me just hear it. Let me hear it. And to be able to like actually consider that, not just kind of pretend to listen to it, but to really listen to it, I think that is important.
So having an open mind seems to be like the biggest thing.
Yeah, but I think it's like I think the kind of thing is just, it's one of those things that's easy to say, like, oh no, I'm an open-minded person, right? But then when you really, really think about how you interact with other people, you're like, am I though really? Like, sometimes like I kind of pretend to be more open-minded than I am about certain things. So it's like challenging yourself in those moments when you're kind of like, I already know what I think about this, to be like, wait a minute, let me make sure. Let me really listen here.
Yeah, no, totally.
And sometimes that's the most interesting. Sometimes that's when you learn the most, in those moments, when you force yourself to listen.
Yeah, of course. Well, those are all the questions that I have for you. Thank you so much again for talking with me. It is greatly appreciated.
You're welcome. Good luck on your assignment.
Thank you.
Now that we've been able to hear from Sarah Koenig herself, I believe there's a lot that we can learn from Serial. From the idea that nothing is ever impossible to accomplish, or to take risks. Whatever you choose to take from this, I hope you learned something valuable, as I certainly did. Thank you for listening. This has been Analytical.